Hi everyone, I'm Dianna with Living on the Fault Lines, my corner of the universe where I'm talking about healing after loss, including the traumatic loss of suicide, which many people aren't talking about. And the reason I'm talking about it is because I found myself in the aftermath 5 years ago when my husband took his life. And as the mother of three young children, I was terrified. And I really didn't find the resources that I needed to find my way through. So I began talking and writing about my experiences as a way to get to the other side. And I've discovered some really wonderful people and interesting ways to get ourselves through this very difficult loss and transition in a way that is healthy for ourselves and our children. And today I'm talking to Ana Holub, who is a really incredible, she's the author of this book, which is called Forgive and Be Free. And forgiveness is one of those really difficult and interesting aspects in the suicide scenario that a lot of people have a hard time with. And Ana really has a great approach. And I'm going to read you her bio because she has just doing so many amazing things in the world. She's a forgiveness counselor, an author, a poet, and a peace educator. She holds a BA in peace studies, an MA in dispute resolution, and she is also a certified domestic violence counselor and radical forgiveness coach. Ana teaches workshops internationally on forgiveness, self-empowerment, women's issues, emotional healing, and communication skills. And you can visit her at anaholub.com. So hi, Ana. Welcome. It's nice to be with you today.
Hi, Diana. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, I'm really so honored because I love talking to people who have different points of view and who can share with the audience, different ways of looking at this really difficult experience. And I would love if you would share with people kind of how you came to this work. And I know you also have suicide in your life. So if you wanted to share a little bit about that too, I think that would be helpful.
Sure. And I do write about this story in my book, and it was not an easy thing to write about.
Hmm.
So I think one of the things that you're doing, which is so wonderful, is that you're giving permission for this conversation to be happening. And it's tender and it's poignant, and we have to crack into it, as best we can and do it softly, I think. So my situation was that I grew up in New Jersey in a family that had mental illness kind of percolating in it from the time I was born, I think.
Hmm.
My mother was a wonderful, caring, loving, beautiful woman, and she also had many bouts of deep fear and anxiety. And so during my childhood, she was going up and down and up and down
Hmm.
in bouts of what was called manic depression at the time. It could be called bipolar um, disorder right now. Anyway, so as she got older and as I was growing up and my two sisters were growing up, her mental state of mind was getting worse and worse, really. And when I was 23, she killed herself, and I was 8.5 months pregnant at the time with my first child. I was also in a very unstable place in my life. I had dropped out of school and changed a lot of things in my life. I was basically a single parent. I was really flapping in the breeze and, kind of out there on faith, not knowing what to do. And while that was happening, my mother reached her saturation point. She couldn't be here anymore. And so she took her life. I was in California at the time. She was in New Jersey. So I needed to get on a plane, hugely pregnant, which was sort of against the law. And I just covered way up, and I had this big coat on, and I was devastated and hugely pregnant and single and almost broke, and really young. I was only 23. So it was a very, very hard time for me. I got on the plane. I made it all the way to her funeral. And I spoke at her funeral, actually.
Hmm.
And I wore the dress that she gave me, which was a maternity dress. And as I said in the book, I thought that was her last gift that she would ever give me. But I turned out to be wrong.
Mm.
So it has been 30 years. This year is 30 years since her death. And so it's given me a lot of time to process this experience. And I realized as I was going through it, both using the forgiveness model that I later came to, and even before that, it took me a while to get to that, just how many layers there really are to unwind and to very, very gently heal with the help of spirit, for one thing. My approach is a very spiritual approach. It's not religious, but it does incorporate that we are living beings and we live on 4 levels and we can't cut off one of them. So our levels are very basically physical level, an emotional level, a mental level, and a spiritual level. And so I have found that the spiritual aspect of this is really huge. And if we leave it out, we will feel lost because we need to have something that's bigger than just ourselves. It's too hard to deal with something this devastating on our own. And I think a lot of people try to do that, and it's hard to talk about. And we're busting through a lot of social conditioning around just shame and guilt and fear around suicide itself. So that's why I really appreciate what you're doing in opening up the conversation.
Yeah, well, trying to
Yeah.
trying to create that opening. I think it's a lot like some of these other very taboo things that we haven't spoken of that have reached their kind of moment in time where it's become it's very important. And I think that's true with suicide. And I do think it's happening on a very sort of, just incremental level. People are starting to be much more open to it. I mean, even for me, you've been doing this for 30 years. Processing this. I've only been 5, but it is layers. It's just, you get to one stage and then all of a sudden there's a whole other layer. And I love that you separate out the spiritual, the mental, and emotional, because those, and then also the physical. But that mental and emotional piece, a lot of people really try to take this and analyze it and put it into that box of not, we're not going to talk about it. And you really have to separate out the emotional piece, don't you? I mean, it's just such a personal journey, but I think you really can't intellectualize something like this. It's something that you have to almost allow to take over you and be with. I always say be in relationship with it. It's almost like a person that has come in your life and they're never going to leave, and you're going to have to find a way to relate to them.
Yes, I would agree with that. I don't know that I would say separate out, although it is helpful to understand, okay, so how am I tracking this? How am I traveling it with it, since I have to? I don't get a choice. I don't get to rerun my life and delete that scene. It's there. And what I also realized, which I think will be true for quite a few people, is that it's not just the suicide. It's the whole relationship that we have with our loved one, with our friend, our lover, our husband, our parent, our child, whoever it was that took their lives. And now we're here and we're still grappling with what does that mean? It's not just the death. I mean, at first it's the big thing. The death is the big thing. And we try to get through it as best we can. But then we have the rest of our lives. And death is so final. And yet it's not at the same time. So for me anyway, once I realized, okay, this is bigger than just one moment when my mother took her life. This is also, what about my whole life growing up with someone who was mentally ill? What about what I received, all those messages about what life is and what life isn't from her perspective, from the time that I got here, pretty much. So depending on the length of the relationship that we've had with our loved one who decided that they just couldn't be here anymore, what it brings up levels of, not only What was the relationship like? Was there mental illness? I think probably for a lot of us there was, in some form or another. Maybe it was recognized, maybe it wasn't. So confusing to be around someone who's really grappling with how to even live here in a rational way. I mean, my mom was sometimes extremely present and amazing and beautiful and talented and loving. And then other times she would be like a completely different person. And so that was hugely confusing to her children. And I've had to then walk through, all right, so what does that mean for me and how I live my life? Because of all the messages I got about what life's about. And then for me to be 8.5 months pregnant with my first child. So here I am saying yes to life. And I was scared to do it. I was really felt on my own. And then to have my mother make this statement about life itself, that life isn't worth staying for. I can't handle it. I need to leave you now. You're going to just have to figure this one out on your own. All those messages were so intense to deal with, and I couldn't not have them. I had to have them.
And how interesting, too, that you actually had to hide your saying yes to life, your pregnancy, in order to attend your mother's funeral. I mean, that's very metaphorical, too, I think. It's quite interesting.
Right. I had to sort of go underground because I couldn't let the authorities realize my state of being so that I could get there. But then on the other hand, and I'm just seeing this right now as you're bringing this up, I was unmarried. So here I am, dropping in fully pregnant to a family situation where all the family is there, all the friends of family, my other siblings are there. Everybody's there to gather in this incredible tragedy. So everyone is very, very upset. And at the same time, I'm dropping in with, oh, well, by the way, I'm the unmarried one who moved to California and did all these radical things, and I don't fit with this entire scene. I didn't feel like I did at the time. I've since gotten more balanced with that with my back east family. I love them very much, but at the time, there were a lot of levels for me personally where I didn't know how to fit into that situation.
Well, and you were also dealing with some very strong social mores. I mean, I was adopted, and so I can totally relate to that. I was born, given to the Children's Home Society, and taken back and given up, and not very long ago, being pregnant and unmarried was something that was judged. And
this was 30 years ago. Yeah. So
I mean, not that long ago, really. When you think about it in the great scheme of things, but in terms of how we socially look at things. When you look at the things we're talking about with suicide and some of these other big social issues, 30 years is huge. And 30 years ago, if I had done that, I would have had a similar reaction from my family as well. So huge to be going back and hiding your pregnancy just to attend this event that, in and of itself contained so much explosive and, emotional dynamics that were so difficult to deal with. And then on top of that, all these other pieces. So that must have been very, very, I imagine you've learned so much, which is where this book has come from. All of these terrible things, unfortunately, that happen to us, I think can be mined for so much amazing information. And I always say I wouldn't wish this on anybody, and I certainly wouldn't want to relive it, but it's one of the most amazing experiences, in terms of transformation and learning about myself and humanity and just, what we're made of, what's really going on beneath the surface, which is what I'm really fascinated with, which is why I think this forgiveness piece is so huge, because it's kind of what's happening underneath the surface of all this stuff. And if people can start to understand how much power they have, not really control, but how much power they have. And when I mentioned earlier about separating out your emotions from your mental state, I guess what I was more saying is just understanding that you don't just have to be in life reacting to it. That you do have that ability to stand with ease and grace in it, and to make decisions about the things that are happening to you. And you talk about that with interpreting. And maybe we can go into the forgiveness piece a little bit now of, you have that power to interpret what's happening in front of you as being good or bad or something that you can learn from. And I'd love to just kind of go into your path of the forgiveness and kind of how people can use that as a healing element in this journey.
Sure. Yeah, and this brings me directly to the connection to spirit. Some people teach forgiveness without it. I don't know how to, so I'm trusting that my way to teach it is this way. And really, when we have such a traumatic thing happening, if we can just relax into knowing there's a much bigger picture, and that we're not alone and we're not floating around, in some kind of huge ocean without support. Yes, there is a huge ocean of life, but it's not coming at us as an attack. And when something awful, or seemingly so awful as someone's suicide or, some kind of other tragic accident, suicide has its own special flavors, though, that are specific to it. And so since we're talking about suicide, we'll keep it to this. And knowing that no matter how awful what we are going through is, it's not just information that can come out of it. They're actual treasures. There are gems that come out of it. And they aren't necessarily on a human level. I mean, on a human level, everything can go to hell in a handbag in a lot of ways. And even as Western Americans and Westernized people, for you and I mean, we have it so much smoother than other people who I hope will watch this as well and know that my heart goes out to people in war-torn areas and poverty-stricken areas. I mean, there's a lot of suffering here on this earth, and it shows up in many different ways. So no matter what kind of suffering we're going through, we're going to need some help from something much larger than our individual self. Otherwise, we will feel very lost. And that's one of the main messages of my book, is that this forgiveness process that I offer and teach it because I use it all the time. It's a way of life. And I have learned that I can really offer my suffering, my sadness about my mom, and the other things that have happened in my life that have been really difficult. And my own fears and anxieties, just the little ones too. I can take all of that and offer it as a laying down of my burdens. And that's the kind of forgiveness that isn't the traditional model. As you said earlier, the traditional model is, well, somebody did something awful. I don't like it. I was hurt by it. I'm pissed off. Or I'm feeling just incredibly depressed by it, or whatever the response is that we have. So then in the traditional model, I'm going to forgive that person because that person's messed up in some way, and what they did was awful, but I'm going to find a way to forgive them. The traditional model keeps all that in place. And it doesn't really give us a map. So we don't even know how to really do it, but we think, oh, I should do it, or I have done it, but we do it just on the mental level, and we never get down into our gut and our heart.
Well, it also comes with that forgive. My mother always used to say, I can forgive, but I'm not going to forget. Kind of the caveat of, it's still there. I'm still going to hold it over you. Exactly. Which is interesting too. And in my experience, I've had this, people will say, well, have you forgiven yet? And it's always said with this kind of edginess to it. Like, that's, I'm not really, it's not so much good enough, but I haven't, reached something if I haven't forgiven. But the model they're talking about is your model. It's not really coming from that heartful, soul level. It's more of this intellectual kind of, I've forgiven you kind of thing. And I that to me, it's why I just love what you're talking about so much.
Right. So the traditional model doesn't really have room for us to learn about our situation or to learn on a soul level. It's more just on a psychosocial level where, in particular, I think there's a gender aspect to it also, where girls and women are taught to be nice, and we should forgive and we should let it go because it's kind of unseemly. You know, I don't know if you were a man and your wife had killed herself, how many people would be asking you, "Oh, have you forgiven yet?" Some people would, but I think there's an added layer to, well, women are supposed to let it go because we're supposed to be nice.
That's interesting. I've never thought of it that way, but I think you're right.
Yeah. So, you know, maybe not everybody would agree with me, but it's certainly from the background that I came from, and this isn't true for all cultures, but it's true for a lot of cultures, that women, I think, and girls feel a bigger pressure that we ought to forgive because of that social conditioning. So I do talk about these layers in the book, like our culture, our gender, our background in our family. The whole thing sets us up for a way in which we're going to either want to hold on to our suffering, or we're going to, on a soul level, come to readiness to let it go. But if we're really going to let it go, then this gets to the more radical part of the radical forgiveness, or what I sometimes call ecstatic forgiveness, because it really is when we have the inner chutzpah, so to speak, to say, yes, I'm going to let this go. Why? Not because I am better than this other person and this person really messed up and I'm going to be so wonderful that I'm going to let them off the hook. That's the old paradigm. The new paradigm is, what is it going to take for me to be free? From me to my own God connection, what's it going to take? What's in the way of my own feeling of peace and freedom? So whatever it is, be it I'm the one that's left with the mess. I'm the one that found the body. I'm the one that has to bring up the kids now. I'm the one who's going to figure out how to pay the bills. All the anger that we might feel at the situation, all of the feeling of abandonment that may also be there. What are we going to do with all of that? How are we going to process it? We need help. So this is a spiritual way of getting support, so that we can actually breathe all of our suffering and pain and loss and anger and confusion out of our bodies, our emotions, and our minds, so that we can link to spirit. Then we can start getting the treasures. The treasures we can't contact with all the stuff in the way. So it's really a cleansing and a laying down of our sorrow.
I love that, the laying down idea. And I love that idea of looking at it for how you're going to find your peace going forward as well. And I'm curious with, you mentioned radical forgiveness, and I've had a bit of exposure to that. And I remember the first time someone said to me, and I'm not sure exactly how, maybe you can just elaborate a little bit on the connection with your work and the radical forgiveness idea. But I remember when someone said to me, and this is maybe 3 years ago, so I wasn't very far out yet, and they said, well, you know, if you think about it on a radical forgiveness level, there's really nothing to forgive, because this was all part of, you know, the master plan to grow your soul. And at that time, I was not ready for that. I just wasn't quite in that space where I could even entertain it, because there was just still so many things going on. But as I've, you know, gotten further and further away, it's a really interesting perspective. It's an interesting way. So how does that meld in with what you're talking about?
Well, I have studied with Colin Tipping, and I took his training, and I have a lot of admiration of him. He's the man that wrote Radical Forgiveness, and he started working with cancer patients, actually, I believe in the 80s or early 90s, where he discovered that people, the vast majority of people who had cancer also had a big unforgiven wound in their life. So he started to explore that. And so the book that I wrote comes out of my experience of not only studying his work, but a lot of other peace education stuff, my own life, and having worked with many, many people. And I see this archetypal path that we follow, meaning that yes, we have our own personal differences. It shows that my story looks different than yours. However, the arc of what we go through as awakening beings, as being more than simply a human unit walking through life, that we have an eternal nature that really wants to learn, and it wants to learn through everything that we've had experienced, that every being is equal to every other being. So that we can't posture in that way that I was speaking about. Oh, these people are all messed up, but I'm not. And therefore, I'm going to forgive them because they were screwed. And I'm so enlightened that I'm going to forgive them. We have to throw that one out and come to this very, very basic equality of beings. So that every single one of us is innocent in our core of who we are and how we have been created by God or by spirit or whatever you want to call it. I really don't want to get stuck on it's not a religious thing. I'm a universalist. I love the truth in all cultures and religions as long as it's loving. So this loving and kind essence that gives us life, and even when we are not in this body, that we are still alive and well, so that even somebody who has committed suicide is still alive and well. Now that's a radical thought. And there's a lot of idea, and certainly back when my mom killed herself, there was a lot going on of, oh, well, she went to hell, or she went to purgatory, or she is going to have to come back as a dog, like all these ideas that are out there that I had to also sift through and not take on from other people because it wasn't my truth. So finding a way in which she is her true nature always, no matter whether she was in that body, whether she chose to leave, whether she's floating with the angels, I don't know. It's a mystery. So trying to figure it out too much can be a real distraction, I find. However, if we can hold each other in equality and realize, yeah, on a human level, some of that stuff really, really hurts. When we are violent to ourselves and others, it hurts. And we need help. So I'm not skipping over that at all. However, if we want healing, we can't stay there, recycling that pain over and over and over again, because then we're in a closed loop and we think there's no way out. So this book, Forgive and Be Free, it is a step-by-step guide of how to get out of that recycling pain loop. To say, okay, I need help. I need to be very, very honest with what's going on. Where are these places that I've been holding on to? What do they look like? What do they feel like? How do they relate back to other things in my life? And how do those things relate to, as a soul, why did I come? And what am I here to learn? There's a huge humbling in that, because then we can't blame the other person or persons, that it's their fault that I'm going through all this stuff. What if it's not anybody's fault? And what if we're all equal and beautiful and timeless? Then what?
Well, then what, yeah. And what do I do with, our society's so programmed and comfortable with the blame and hanging on to that suffering, because it's very powerful. It's very powerful to be a victim. So I think this is such an empowering way to live, rather than being on that stretch of highway that is just, I'm a victim, I've been wronged, and that kind of thing, never getting off it. This is really such a wonderful way to give people a chance to step into their own reason for being here, and opening their eyes to just that curiosity and that tenderness of really coming home to themselves. When you were talking, I just kept hearing in my head, it's being able to be comfortable in your skin and being here and feeling home. And that's something I never really felt until quite recently, after going through this and being on a similar journey to you with the whole spiritual piece of finally really feeling settled in who I am and understanding I'm imperfect, I have flaws, and that's okay. And other people are imperfect and have flaws, and that's okay. And just much less judgmental and that kind of stuff. So what are there a lot of steps to this? Are there things that we could talk about today, like beginning processes? I mean, I'd love for everybody to go get the book, and we'll put this up at the end as well. But for someone who's listening to this who maybe's never encountered forgiveness or who looks at it in the old paradigm, can we walk through maybe some of the beginning steps of how someone would put their toe in the water here?
Sure. Yeah. Well, just the meditation on equality is a big one, and it's a good one to start with, because often we have been trained so much in so many different ways to always be checking about the hierarchy, checking about, am I good enough, checking about, do I fit in, checking, does this person like me, checking, do I have an impact on the world, and how cool am I. All that stuff has got to be moved aside, even for an instant, so that we can say, all right, what if all of us are just equal, precious, innocent children of God, children of the Spirit that made us? Even though we cannot figure out what that Spirit is with our minds, we can still feel it. So if that is at all a possibility, that no one's better than anybody else, and everyone keeps on living and living and living, even if our bodies change, and we can still contact each other in this way with love, then that is kind of a way to start, to just try on, is this even acceptable to me? Will my mind even take this in? And if your mind right now is having a hard time with that, that's fine, because it gives you feedback of how much you're hanging on. Any one of us is hanging on to, this is my idea about life. Just like my mom had her ideas about life, and finally she was so miserable she felt like she needed to leave. I don't think that death is the answer. Just because we take our body off doesn't mean that we get enlightened or that we have worked through our emotional stuff. So I've realized, okay, I need to stay here and keep working through this and keep unpeeling. So the next idea really is about how there's nothing wrong with any of us, because our true nature is perfect and beautiful and grace-filled. And yet we don't always experience that. Some people have never experienced it, or we get little flashes of it. So what I've come to realize is that it's all about unpeeling. It's all about taking off the layers. We don't have to add anything. A lot of times we run around going, oh my God, if I could just meditate for longer, or if I just could get all my thoughts out of my head, or if I just could be better at yoga or better at this. That's not it. That's just another layer of pain. So all we need to do is get into this massive striptease. That's how I called it, Just take off the veils. Just keep unlayering, keep getting naked. And this forgiveness process is a big teaching in how to do that. So that we say to Spirit, I just don't want this pain anymore. I can't hold it anymore. It's too much for me. And it's a very deep, humbling prayer. I always start with prayer in this process. If you're not comfortable with prayer, that's fine. You can say, I intend this to happen. If you're comfortable with prayer, you can just make it up on the spot. It's a spontaneous discussion with and giving and receiving with Spirit, to say, I need help. I can't do this on my own. And this well of pain it's overflowing. I don't know what to do. Please help me. So that's where we start. And it's a very poignant place.
It is a very poignant place. And I'll just interject there, because my experience is exactly what you're talking about, where I really resisted, that idea of prayer. And maybe, someone would be more comfortable with the word conversation, or, communication with that deepest part of yourself, that inner wisdom. But I have found in the last few years, since I've been doing that and just really regularly connecting with that, it's the strangest sense of just being held. Like I literally have this sense of being um, just held in this really lovely, comfortable kind of knowing that there is something else out there. And sometimes I literally have a sense that I'm being directly communicated to. I mean, just this move I'm doing right now, everything I've asked for, everything has been delivered to me in almost exactly the format. And it's so strange to me, but at the same time, it feels so right because there's just been this trust. And so maybe it's, it's that willingness to surrender to something that's bigger than ourselves and really trust that it's there. And that's, I find the more that I do that, the more I'm willing to just surrender to that unknown. That peace and that sense of being home is coming back to me in just huge ways, which is really incredible. And I don't think if you and I had had this conversation 4 years ago, I just wouldn't have even been able to relate to what you're talking about in here. But I really do get that. I hope people can take that in and really start creating something that's their own. And it isn't going to a church and sitting in a pew and holding a Bible. And if that's it, that's okay too. But it doesn't have to be that. It's just that it's really that very personal conversation, isn't it? Yeah, really, it's lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm so glad that I'm so glad we're talking now and not a few years ago. So
Right. Well, perfect timing, right?
mm-hmm.
And
Divine
that's one of the
intervention.
aspects of knowing that we're really what sometimes is called in the flow,
Mm-hmm.
right? When we notice all these things are lining up for our good, and the amount of love and the amount of freedom that is available for us is mind-blowing. So we have to let our minds get blown apart. In other words, the places that have really clinched, like this is life, this is how it sucks, this is how people are out to get me and life is out to get me, all of that just has to go
Mm-hmm.
so that there's some room to try on something else. And so we can do that in a way that's very soft and gentle, actually, which is through our prayer or our asking and then our receiving. So that's how we start. And I always say to people, and this is something Colin Tipping also says, and I think it's a very important point to bring up, is that we will forgive when we're ready. And I had many years where I was working stuff out within myself, but I didn't come into contact with this material until I was ready. So some people can move through stuff faster than others. We really need to step aside from a judgment like, geez, it took you that long. I mean, it took me 16 years to begin really, really deeply moving through my own patterns and my own resistance. So if it took me 16 years, it could take somebody 5 or a month or 20 years, and it doesn't matter. Everybody has their own very gentle soul timetable. Right? This is not our personality. This is much bigger. So when we're ready, it's just really great to know that this is available so that we don't have to stay lost and feeling buffeted by pain, like there's nothing we can do about it and that we're a victim to our circumstance. So even what you're describing and what I'm describing has served us so well in terms of being relaxed inside of who we are. And that's a gift that then ripples out to everyone else. So we become peace ambassadors. And every one of us, as we are willing to get help from spirit and willing to listen, then we become part of the awakening tribe. And the tribe is huge. Sometimes it really helps me to remember not only is there a spirit that gives me life, but there's also a huge tribe of people all around the planet who are going through this with me. We are doing this together. And it's quite astounding. We can call it forgiveness, we can call it something else, but the coming home part is the same. So one of the things I mentioned in the book is about how, How.
Mm-hmm.
And because people say, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? I mean, it sounds great, but let's get practical.
Mm-hmm.
How do I do this thing? So myself and my partner at the time, Peter, we came up with this thing called how: honesty, openness, and willingness.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can remember, all right, am I being honest? Am I really being honest? Like, cut through a few more layers and get down to the honesty of, yeah, this is how I really feel. This is how angry I really am. These are the nasty thoughts that are actually going through my head. That kind of honesty, where it's not everybody else, but what about me? What's in the way of my peace and freedom? That kind of honesty.
Mm-hmm.
It's necessary. And then there's openness. All right, let me be open to something new, because what I already know isn't really helping me out here. And I already know it so damn well. I'm so sick of it. We have to get to that point where we're so tired of doing the recycling that we're really open for something new and different to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then we need to be willing to step into something that's a mystery. And that willingness and that sincerity is mana. It is the freshness that gives us like a whole new sense of, all right, one, I can handle it. I'm going to make myself meet this next thing. I'm not going to run away one more time, even though I know how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or if I do run away one more time, no problem, compassion, I'm back.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm eternal, so it's not really a problem. Right? So those things, that how, honesty, openness, and willingness, and what goes with that is trust, like you were saying before.
Mm-hmm.
So those are the ingredients that we need to start this process. And then in the book, I lay out all the steps that we go through in order to honestly see, okay, what is it? What are these painful places? And then come to a point where we're ready to let them go, and we breathe them out and offer them to the God of our understanding. We say that in 12-step work. I like it because it really brings back to what is my understanding. And it's going to be different than yours, and I don't have to put my thing on you. I don't want your thing on me. I just want to know from directly here, this vertical experience, what is my understanding of the mystery? And I'm not going to get it all figured out. It's more like my direct experience of mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And allowing that to heal. We don't heal each other. Spirit heals us. We can support each other for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately it's spirit and the washing through of grace that is the healing.
And do you find in your work and the these different modalities that you've done that learning to really be with this discomfort, because I think so many of us we're very practiced in running, whether it's through drinking or actually running away.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of different ways that we can do that, but for me, what I've found, and a lot of the people I've spoken to, I think there's a great inability to tolerate the discomfort and these experiences that we have, and yet in doing that, in just being with the pain of, a loved one taking their life, there's a real, it creates that kind of, the mind blowing you were talking about earlier, where instead of pushing it off into a corner and allowing it to kind of fester and take on a life of its own, when you're with it and you realize that you can actually survive it, and that it can transform you. I mean, how important is that in your work? How does that play into this forgiveness piece?
I think it's really essential, and I'm glad you brought that up. Particularly, I think, in the United States and maybe elsewhere in the world, but not everywhere in the world.
Mm.
So I'll speak to what I know here. There are so many socially supported ways of distracting ourselves. There's so much agreement.
Mm.
Oh, don't feel that, come out and have a beer, or don't feel that, turn on the TV, or, oh, don't feel that, go get some antidepressants, right? Mm-hmm. So we're masking and having this group agreement to mask our pain, and then we haven't really healed. So this is radical in the sense that we have to say, no, I'm not going to do that one. And what it takes is actually a slow process, although it can feel very intense, of working our inner muscles to stay present, to come back, and like you say, realize, but we have to test it, realize that we can survive heartbreak. It's not just our minds that get blown open, it's our hearts and our guts. It seems like at times I felt like I was being turned inside out. Mm-hmm. And it's an incredibly weird and uncomfortable feeling. So we need to know how to stay present. So we need to stay with our breath. I do a lot, when I do individual coaching, I do a lot with helping people to use their breath to stay with whatever's happening. Mm-hmm. And noticing how many times we can go off, even with humor. Some people use humor, they make a joke, they change a subject, whatever. So learning how to come back again and again to the depth of whatever it is. And it's not only the depth of pain, it's the depth of joy too. It's like in our culture where it's supposed to be in this very specific band of experience. Mm-hmm. And if we pop out of it, it can stir things up. It can be socially uncomfortable. We can lose friends over it. Oh, yeah. And so that's the willingness part. We have to be willing to say, this is the priority of my life. Mm-hmm. This comes before everything. Even for me as a mother, I had to realize that this is the best thing I can do for my kids, is to really get to know myself and to get anchored in love so that I have something to give them and that they can watch, that it's okay for mom to cry. Mm-hmm. It's okay for mom to not have it together, although that's a challenge, but it's okay for adults to show kids that adults aren't always masked. Mm-hmm. That we have deep feelings and that we will come out of it. And this is the way to do it. It's actually a great service to children and teens to be able to show them our inner life, I think, in an appropriate way, of course. Not necessarily dumping a lot of information on them, but just letting them feel us go through ups and downs.
Well, it gives them permission to feel their stuff too, doesn't it? Yeah. I think that's a huge part. So much we're just not modeling for our kids anymore. There's no model for these children to understand that it's okay to be angry, but how you express that anger is important as well. And it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be ecstatically joyful. Yeah. And all of this, I think, it's so important for people to understand is that it's a practice. Every day. Like you said, it's that mind running off. I mean, I haven't been meditating that long in the great scheme of things, but, I know even experienced meditators, it isn't about getting rid of the thought. It's just being present and noticing where you're getting taken away from. And I think another one of the really big distractions you were talking about is consumerism. I mean, our society is just bombarded with, buy. And, people are out at the malls and, and all of that, I think, can represent a huge escapism method if you're not careful, if you're not watching, if you're not paying attention. So,
Well, the next book that I'm working on now really speaks to this because it's all about healing addiction of all kinds by using this process of forgiving ourselves and forgiving others. Every time we reach for something outside of ourselves, oh, let me just buy that thing, or oh, let me just, sneak off to some porn, or oh, let me just eat that type of ice cream, whatever it might be. We can pick a variety of different distractions, but underneath all that is the unfinished business of what has not yet been forgiven. Mm-hmm. And it's not a problem because we can just begin our forgiveness process. Mm-hmm. And it's always available, constantly available, as the love of spirit is constantly available. So no matter where we are in life or how deep our addictions go, and I want to add that one of the things I'm exploring is that the addictions are not just the obvious ones. There are many, many subtle ones that aren't necessarily called addictions, but they are. Like addiction to approval from others, addiction to getting attention from others, addiction to stealing credit, things like that that are not so obvious as, I'm in the gutter and drunk. That, there are lots of levels to it.
Right.
So even an addiction to being a separate, alone, and isolated entity. That's probably the ultimate addiction. And so we're all working through that one, as long as we have not yet been enlightened. There's some people that maybe aren't done with the process and they're still here and they're doing their beautiful thing. They're helping the rest of us. But for myself and for many, many people, I think this is our equality edge, right, that we're working with. And so being willing to really release and offer up our pain and sorrow and have true compassion not only for ours but for everyone's, including, say, where was my mother at when she chose to end her life? I mean, what kind of horror was going through her mind and her body? And for a long time, that was so awful to even think about that it was hard for me to get there. And yet I'm connected to her and I care about her. And it's like, wait a minute, what could make a person do that? Not just think about it, but actually go all the way through with it and go to the other side because they just cannot be here anymore. So to be able to contemplate, all right, so I have my sorrows and she had hers. She had her bewilderment and fears and I have mine. And it helps us to be, the more honest we get with our own stuff, the more we realize, okay. So as my mom used to say, we all have our mishigas, which is Yiddish for we've all got our stuff. We've got our shit that we're working out.
We've got our shit. Everybody has their shit, right?
Well, yeah. And I tell people who come to my workshops, if you don't have anybody to forgive that you're working on personally, no problem. Go to the planetary levels. Please work with the military-industrial complex. Work with big pharma. Work with geoengineering. Whatever you want. But we're not done.
Right.
We are not done. As a collective, there's nothing to forgive on a huge spiritual truth. However, when we're living here in 3D, we need to walk through this stuff. We cannot avoid it any longer. So it really is an exciting time. And the simplicity of these steps of saying a prayer, being really honest with what's going on, finding the knots, the constrictions, and then offering them to Spirit with our breath and with our willingness. Let it out, these are the steps of this forgiveness process. And then once we feel complete with that, really staying with it. Because then there's a huge reception that happened. We made room. Through our free will, we made room. Okay, let me let go of this so that I can see I have no idea who I am without it, which can feel scary. Even if it's a horrible thought, I'm still so used to it, But then when we let it go, we say, all right, now I have no idea what's happening. But through that not knowing, there's an opening for an immense amount of love and healing to come to us. And that's the receiving part. That's where we start getting, treasure. Treasure even in the worst thing. Gift. Oh, wow. Realizations. One of the realizations for me is that my mother is still with me. She has not left me. And God has not left me. So when we experience suicide of a loved one, it can feel like the ultimate betrayal and the ultimate abandonment. And I know what that feels like. It's awful. And yet, if at the at the other end of the process, there's this realization that, oh, no one ever left me. We're here. We're all here together. And I can walk around with this peace and I can share it with other people. Then life starts getting really great. That's the ecstatic part of ecstatic forgiveness.
Right. I love that when you were saying the opening and having that sense, because I've had that a lot, particularly recently, of just, oh, when you understand that it's okay to see things a different way, and to me that it seems like that's a lot of what this creates. It's that permission to actually step into this space of being in the aftermath of a suicide and being able to look at it in different ways and to interpret it in different ways, and having those aha moments, those really beautiful revelations about things that allow you, to have that sense that whether it's feeling that your mother's still with you, or having an understanding that the person who made this choice to leave wasn't doing it to you, you know, that they were not capable of, enduring any longer, or whatever their perception was, that it wasn't necessarily. I've spoken to a number of people who've been on that side, and in their mind it was never about doing it to someone else. It was getting out of the pain. And that's very hard when you're on this end of it and you feel the abandonment and you feel that sense of loss. It's easy to take all of this very personal. And I think you talked about this a little earlier. It's something that I've been fascinated with, that I think makes the healing in the aftermath of suicide so difficult, is that original wound we really all carry with us. And Brene Brown calls it unworthiness. There's many unworthy, undeserving, you know, going through a suicide really kind of pokes at that, I think, for people. And that sense of, well, I guess I'm not worthy. I mean, this person couldn't stay around for me. So therefore, what does that really mean about me? And a lot of people are never able to really kind of get around that barrier any longer, which I think is really beautiful. This process sounds like it's something that would open that door for people in a really beautiful way.
Right. And if we open it for ourselves, if we really do it, then we open it simultaneously for every being.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that no matter what anyone else has done, they still are just as perfect and innocent as what we find within ourselves. Mm-hmm. So it's like a huge wash of forgiveness for others and also for ourselves, for the things that we're not proud of, or the guilt we might feel like, oh, I have a dear friend whose son committed suicide, and he had just gone off to college. And she thought, oh, well, I didn't know what was going on with him. I didn't realize he was binge drinking. I didn't realize. I should have known. I should have called him. I should have saved him. And I went through that also, that I should have saved my mother in some way. And so we need to work through that one also, that there's something we could have done. I do feel that when a being is ready to leave, they will. And all the other people around may love them, may care for them, but it's really not our responsibility or even our ability to keep another soul in their body. We can help, and if they're willing, they will come toward us and maybe change their minds. Mm-hmm. But really, it's part of recognizing that I am sovereign, and my direct relationship is to spirit, and so is yours, and so is my mom's, and so is this guy, my friend's son. All of the beautiful beings that have decided to leave are not any less beautiful. They are not any less talented and wonderful and deep. When I have talked to people and had a close relationship with someone who was suicidal at times, and he would say, and I've heard this from other people, and it helped me a lot. He would say, well, when I thought about leaving, I thought it would be better for everyone if I left. Mm-hmm. And I said, really? Oh my gosh, that was huge for me to realize that maybe my mother thought, oh, if I just take myself off the planet, everyone else can go back to their great life, and I'll just get out of the way, and it will be better. So that's a very distorted way of thinking, but it's also more loving than I hate you all and I'm going to attack you and punish you forever by leaving. That is really not, I think, what people are thinking in their own sorrow and their own pain when they're in that state. And I can't speak for everyone, of course,
I've heard that a lot too. I think you're right. I've heard that. Yeah.
Just knowing that that's a possibility is soothing to me. It's wrong that it's better that, like, so if someone's listening now and has had suicidal thoughts or made a plan or any of that, I just want to tell you it's not better if you leave. It's not. People will want you to be here. We need you and your beauty and your love here on earth to help us wake up.
Yes, we do.
And everyone has the freedom to make their own decision about it.
Yeah,
it's temporary anyway.
It is temporary, and we like to think we have control, and I think that's probably one of the hardest parts, isn't it? That, you know, I think the guilt that goes along with this, that I should have been able to stop it. I should have, you know, well, we're not mind readers, and I think, you know, life is very uncertain, and we don't always know what the person next to us is thinking, and because we lack so much connection, which kind of leads into my question. I could sit here and talk to you all day because it's fascinating. We probably have to do another conversation because I know we haven't been able to cover a lot of the stuff in your book. But I do think this lack of connection and sense of belonging is, you know, has become very diluted today. And people don't feel like they can share their innermost feelings. And I think suicidal thoughts probably are quite common, but much more so than people probably would like to accept or realize. And I guess in your work, as we wrap up here, you know, to me, the message of suicide, we have, if you believe in the numbers, you know, 1 million people a year are taking their lives on the planet, give or take, which is a lot. That's a lot of human souls making this choice. And I really think there's a bigger message in that. I think suicide is asking us to look at the way we are connecting with people and ourselves and the way we're not connecting any longer. And so in your work, Anna, what do you think that mean? What does that mean to you? And how do you think this forgiveness can really bring that connection back to our fabric of society?
Yeah, I think you're really touching on something that's so important. Because many people, when they choose to commit suicide, they feel so isolated, like there's no way out. They're hopeless, and so that means that they don't have a mechanism where they can reach out. So I think the best thing that I know how to do is to start reaching in to my own places of pain and forgive them, forgive myself. So that the more we do that, the more cleared out we get, the more light we bring, the more willingness I have to show what it is that's going on with me. So then I give permission to other people. It's almost like we need to walk it. We need to be the change that we want. So we need to walk it, and that means we need to do our own work. And not expect that other people are going to do it and then somehow it's going to make my life better. Yes, it makes my life better because we lift each other up. Right. However, how can I reach out if I'm scared of my own stuff? I won't be able to sit with anybody else and really hold space and listen and be kind if I'm running away from my own stuff myself. And that's one of the things I think that has happened is that we've been encouraged to run away, and we have to turn around and start running toward spirit and toward peace, like our hair's on fire.
That's a good way. And towards ourselves, too.
Yeah, well, that is toward ourselves.
Yeah, like our hair's on fire. That's a great way to put it.
Yeah, that's an old Buddhist saying, or it might be Hindu. I think it's Buddhist.
I think it's Buddhist. I think I've heard that.
We have to love this and want truth so much. It's as if our hair's on fire and we're running toward a pond. That's how much we want it.
And there's so much freedom in that. I mean, I know you know that. I know am still on the road of discovering that, living in that place of not knowing yourself is really a place of constriction and limitation. And you are at a great disadvantage because you can't help others and you can't ever really be with others, I don't think, fully until you are, you know, willing to take that step and run towards yourself, your spirit, and just allow. And then you just have this open spaciousness that I think attracts people, and really what you're talking about gives them permission to then take a deep breath, and it all just ripples out from there. And then we're rebuilding that connection that we're talking about, which I just feel is so important. My path through this has been meeting a lot of people who just feel very sad and lonely and disconnected, and I think that's a big root of this problem, which is why I think your work is fabulous. And I would really love to have another conversation with you. And in the meantime, I hope everybody will take the chance to read this book, because there's a lot of great information in here, and I think it will open the door to a really different way of being with yourself. And if you are in the aftermath of suicide, of navigating this experience with a different set of eyes. So where can people find you, Anna? And if they wanted to work with you and all that kind of stuff, let's talk about that.
Sure, yeah. My website is just my name. It's www.anaholub.com. So that's ANAHOLUB.com. When you get on my website, there's some free downloads. There's a way to contact me directly. I do a free consultation for new clients, so just call me and we can talk, and you can make sure that it's right for you. Then we can make an appointment. There's the book. There's also a CD, and there are 3 e-courses that I have written that are all available on my site. And the book is now available in Spanish and in French.
Wow.
So if you know Spanish and French speaking people and you want to share it with them, there's a link on my site for how to get that as well. By the way, I am really supporting independent booksellers. So if you'd like to get the book, you can order it from my site, but you can also just trundle on down to your local bookstore and ask them to order it instead of going to Amazon. Because our bookstores are so essential for our towns. Mm-hmm. And I like to put in a plug for local booksellers, independent booksellers.
Yeah, bravo. I'm a big fan of the bookstore. My books are going to be the biggest part of my move. So, all right. Well, I really appreciate you spending the time. I just so enjoyed it. And I hope there was I know there was some helpful information in here for people. And I'm so glad that you have this resource-rich website and everything, and you're accessible. So if anybody needs more information, they can contact you. But thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you, Dianna.
Thank you for your work. All right.
Amazing work.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and we will chat again.
Okay.
Thanks everyone for being here. Bye-bye.